I stood in my parents' living room, arms crossed tightly against my chest, the air thick with tension that had been brewing for weeks. My father, Brian, was pacing near the fireplace, his face red with frustration, eyes narrowed as if trying to bore holes through me with sheer disappointment. The same room that once held Christmas mornings and birthday celebrations now felt colder than I'd ever known it to be. "You're jealous, Megan," he snapped, pointing a firm finger in my direction. "That's all this is." I didn't answer right away. I could feel the blood rising to my face, my jaw clenched so hard it ached. My breath came sharp and shallow. I wanted to yell, to fight back, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. We had danced this dance before, though never quite like this. "I'm not," I began, but my mother, Sharon, cut me off with a laugh. Not the kind that brought warmth or ease. It was short, dismissive, and stung more than any insult. "Oh, come on, Megan," she said, waving her hand like I was some annoying gnat at a summer barbecue. "You're 31 years old. Refusing to come to your sister's wedding because you feel left out? That's not grown-up behavior, it's childish." The words slammed into me harder than I expected. I bit the inside of my cheek and tasted blood. Childish. That's what they thought of me. That's what I had become in their eyes. A petulant little girl throwing a tantrum because her younger sister was getting married first. It was always like this with Alice. From the moment she was born, she seemed to glow. The golden child, as I had once half-jokingly, half-bitterly referred to her in front of my friends. And it wasn't just a nickname, it was practically her title in this family. Straight A's, homecoming queen, med school, now marrying her high school sweetheart in a ceremony that apparently demanded the attendance of every blood relative, friend, and casual acquaintance we'd ever known. I wasn't against her marriage. I wasn't against her happiness. But the way everyone, especially our parents, had placed her on a pedestal for so long made it impossible not to feel like I was permanently stuck in her shadow. And now, when I said I didn't feel comfortable attending a wedding where I knew I'd be treated like a footnote, it became a declaration of war. "It's not about jealousy," I said finally, my voice lower than I expected, rough around the edges. "It's about boundaries. It's about respect." Brian scoffed, crossing his arms. "Don't talk to me about respect when you're disrespecting this whole family by acting like a drama queen." I swallowed hard, blinking against the burn in my eyes. No one had asked me how I felt. No one had asked why I hadn't RSVP'd to Alice's wedding. They just assumed it was petty, assumed I was sulking because I wasn't the one in white walking down the aisle to applause and admiration. "It's one weekend, Megan," Sharon added like that made it easier. "One day. Can't you just put your feelings aside and show up for your sister?" That was the part that got me. The assumption that I hadn't been putting my feelings aside for years. The holidays I came home to sit through endless conversations about Alice's exams, Alice's new boyfriend, Alice's internships, while my own accomplishments, organizing entire conferences, building a career from the ground up without their help, barely earned a nod. I had been swallowing disappointment, resentment, and loneliness for so long, I could hardly tell where it ended and I began. But when I finally said no, I wouldn't go to the wedding, not if it meant sitting through another evening of being reminded that I was somehow less. Suddenly I was the problem. Suddenly I was immature. "I've supported her," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I've been there for her more times than I can count. I'm not angry that she's getting married. I'm angry that none of you can even begin to understand why this is hard for me." "You've always been dramatic," Brian muttered. I stared at him, stunned, though I shouldn't have been. His words carried the weight of years of dismissal, the kind that seeps into your bones when you grow up knowing you're not the favorite. He didn't mean it to hurt. That was the worst part. It was just the truth to him. "I'm not going," I said quietly but firmly. "And if you can't understand that, then maybe that's exactly why I need to stay away." For a long moment no one spoke. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, like fog that refused to lift. Sharon turned back to the kitchen, muttering something about stress she didn't need. Brian shook his head, muttering under his breath about ungrateful children. I stood there for another moment before picking up my bag. My hands trembled as I zipped my coat. I wanted them to stop me, to ask me to stay and talk, really talk, not to shame me, not to guilt me, but to actually listen. But no one moved. So I walked out, heart pounding, eyes burning, the old wooden door closing behind me with a final hollow click. Looking back, the most painful part wasn't that no one came to the wedding. It was the silence that followed. Not the absence of chairs being filled or champagne glasses clinking, but the complete and utter disregard, as if that day, my day, had never even happened. I had spent years doing everything I thought was right. I had been the reliable one, the self-sufficient daughter who didn't ask for much, who didn't rebel, who didn't make mistakes that brought shame or embarrassment. I built my life brick by brick, quiet and steady, never demanding recognition. I graduated early, landed a position at Summit Cove Financial without anyone pulling strings, climbed the ladder on merit alone, and when Alex and I decided to get married, I didn't dream of extravagance or spectacle. I just wanted to celebrate something real. The ceremony was small, intimate, and filled with sincerity. We chose the garden of a historical house on the edge of town, surrounded by autumn leaves that painted everything in warm gold and deep rust. I had found my dress secondhand and tailored it myself over several evenings after work, the needle slipping between my fingers as I worked in quiet satisfaction. Alex wore a simple navy suit with his grandfather's watch on his wrist. He smiled when I walked toward him, a kind of smile that made everything else in the world fall away. His eyes didn't leave mine through the vows, and I remember the way his hands trembled when he slid the ring onto my finger. I had invited everyone. I didn't just send a card and hope for the best, I called. I explained the date, offered help with transportation, said they could stay at our place or we'd cover a hotel if needed. I even offered to arrange carpools with friends driving in. I tried to make it easy. I tried to make it impossible to say no. But one by one they declined. Some didn't even respond. My mother gave a vague excuse about Alice's college visits. My father said work was especially busy. My aunt replied to the invitation email with a thumbs-up emoji and never followed up. Even my cousins who I used to babysit during summer breaks didn't send a message. No one from my family came. Not a single chair on their side of the aisle was filled. And yet I still called the next morning to thank them for thinking of us. I left voicemails saying I hoped they were well. I sent pictures even though I hadn't been asked for any. I told myself they were busy, they didn't mean harm, that maybe something had come up at the last minute and they hadn't known how to explain. But deep down I knew it wasn't that. It was that my life, my love, my happiness, my choices, didn't hold the same weight to them as Alice's did. They didn't see my wedding as something worth celebrating. Maybe they didn't even see it as real. They had been so quick to rally around her engagement. So quick to post photos of her and Tyler on family group chats, gushing about her ring, already planning what dresses to wear and what songs should be played. But when I stood under that rust-colored oak tree holding Alex's hand and promising to build a life together, it was as if I didn't exist. Even now, 8 months later, they talk about Alice's upcoming wedding as if it were the family event of the decade, asking each other which hotel they'll be staying at, who'll bring what to the bridal shower, how emotional it'll be to see her walk down the aisle. No one has ever asked me how mine went. No one has ever said, "Megan, you looked beautiful that day," or, "Wasn't that such a lovely location?" Nothing. And what hurts more than the silence is the way they act like they still expect me to play the same role. To show up, to clap, to smile, to give. Like my absence at Alice's wedding would be the first time I've ever disappointed them, when in truth I have been living with their disappointment for years. Or rather, their indifference, which is a quieter, colder version of the same thing. I think sometimes about the night before my wedding. I was sitting on the couch with Alex, folding napkins into small linen fans, and I realized that no one had called. No last-minute wishes, no pep talks, not even a "good luck tomorrow, sweetie." The phone was silent. My own mother hadn't said a word. I tried to laugh it off, told Alex that maybe they were just trying to give me space, but the knot in my stomach told another story. And when I walked down the aisle the next day, I had to force myself not to look for their faces in the crowd. I smiled anyway. I smiled because I had to. Because even though the people who raised me weren't there, I had Alex. I had his family who barely knew me but still cried during the ceremony. I had my friends who danced like fools under string lights and toasted us like they meant it. I had love, real, enduring, mutual love. And maybe that's what made the absence feel both less and more devastating at the same time. Because I knew what family could look like and I knew what I had missed. I wasn't the angry, sulking sister who refused to be happy for someone else. I had already proven that. I had given them the chance to celebrate with me and they chose not to. Now they wanted me to pretend none of it mattered. To wear a pastel dress and smile in photographs like the scar hadn't formed. But it had. And it still ached every time they asked me why I couldn't just let it go. The morning of the wedding, I told myself it didn't matter how many people showed up. I reminded myself over and over that the day was about Alex and me, about the vows we were going to speak and the life we were going to build, not about a head count or which side of the aisle was more filled. But when I walked into the garden and saw the empty rows on my side, something inside me cracked in a way I couldn't control. Only one person sat there. Caitlin, my closest friend since college, her red curls catching the sunlight as she turned around and gave me a smile that was meant to be encouraging. She wore a navy blue dress I had helped her choose 2 weeks before and clutched the small bouquet I'd made for her the night before, knowing full well she would be the only one to hold one. She stood when she saw me and motioned for me to breathe, a subtle nod of reassurance, the kind only best friends could give. I tried to focus on her presence, on the simple fact that at least someone was there, that someone thought today mattered. Before the ceremony started, Caitlin quietly moved from chair to chair on my side of the aisle, taking her purse and sweater and placing them strategically to make it look as if others had simply stepped away for a moment. She draped her shawl over a second seat and placed a folded jacket across a third. I saw her carefully tilt one of the programs onto the edge of a fourth chair, as if it had been left there by someone who would be right back. Her gestures were small, quiet, but each one was like a hand trying to cover a bruise, hoping it would fade by the time someone looked too closely. And I loved her for it, I truly did. But it didn't stop the ache in my chest when I looked up and saw the contrast on Alex's side. His parents beamed with joy, his sister had already teared up, and his uncles, cousins and childhood neighbors filled the seats with easy laughter and whispered conversations. It was everything I had always pictured growing up. A family gathered in support, a net of warmth and celebration beneath the couple. His mother had helped us with flowers, his dad had driven in 2 days early to help set up lights, and every guest on that side of the aisle seemed to understand how important this day was, even if they'd only known me for a short time. In a strange and painful way, they had shown more interest in my marriage than the people who had raised me. I remember standing behind the curtain of ivy before the music began, gripping my bouquet so tightly my knuckles turned white. My throat was dry, my knees locked, and for a few seconds I considered not walking down the aisle at all. Not because I didn't want to marry Alex, but because the shame of being so visibly alone was unbearable. I had always been independent, proud of my ability to take care of myself, to be enough on my own, but no one prepares you for the heartbreak of being ignored during the most significant moment of your life. After the ceremony, which was simple and beautiful despite the absences, people came up to hug us, to say kind things, to compliment the vows and the food and the music. But every compliment felt like it had a shadow behind it. I smiled, I posed for photos, I thanked everyone graciously, but a quiet hollow followed me all evening. Every time someone asked where my parents were, I gave the same careful lie. They had a work emergency, they couldn't get away. I said it so many times, it started to sound like truth even though it burned each time it left my mouth. Later, when I spoke to my parents, they gave their excuses with the same indifference they used when canceling lunch plans. My father muttered something about deadlines and an unexpected project at the office. My mother simply said, "It was just bad timing," as if that absolved them of any guilt. They didn't ask how it went. They didn't ask for pictures. They didn't even say congratulations. But the most painful silence came from Alice. She never even acknowledged that the wedding had happened. No call, no message, not even a passing comment on social media. She hadn't RSVP'd, hadn't sent a gift, hadn't said anything to indicate that she knew I had stood in a dress and said vows and kissed my husband under falling leaves while the seat reserved for her stayed empty. It was as though my wedding existed in a parallel universe where she simply didn't have to participate. Sometimes I wonder if she did it to make a point, to remind me that her wedding, the one everyone now fawns over, is the real one. Or maybe more likely she just didn't care. To her, I was the older sister who had chosen a different path, a less glamorous one. Someone whose milestones weren't worth interrupting her schedule for. It wasn't about the size of the guest list or the number of people who toasted us. It was about being treated like I didn't matter, like this huge, beautiful thing I had built didn't deserve recognition. I had poured myself into that day, into building a life with Alex, into creating a future we could be proud of. And my own family couldn't even be bothered to bear witness. I've tried to make peace with it. I've told myself they're busy, that they don't realize how much it hurt, that maybe they're just emotionally distant in a way I'll never fully understand. But deep down I know they chose not to be there. And that choice echoes through every memory I have of that day, lingering in every photo where a chair sits empty, every moment I smiled through a heart quietly breaking. I tried to forgive them. Over and over again I told myself that people make mistakes, that maybe they didn't realize how deeply they had hurt me. I rehearsed rationalizations in my head like mantras. They were busy, they're not good with emotions, maybe they thought I didn't want them there badly enough. I even tried to believe that their absence wasn't intentional, that maybe it was just poor timing and unfortunate collision of schedules. But no matter how many times I rewrote the story in my mind, the reality never changed, they didn't come. And worse than that, they acted like it didn't matter. At family gatherings I became an expert in pretending. I smiled when I had to, nodded politely when someone mentioned Alice's wedding plans, laughed softly when my mother gushed about the floral arrangements or the venue or the custom invitations. I kept my mouth shut when they showed her engagement photos around the table, passing their phones back and forth like sacred relics. I sat through conversations that swirled with excitement and praise, and I forced my body to remain still, even when everything inside me screamed to get up and walk out. Each of those gatherings felt like a test, a performance I had to pass without flinching. I played my part so well that I think even Alex started to believe I was okay. I became so good at acting unaffected that people began to treat my silence as peace. But it wasn't peace. It was survival. I had built a dam inside myself, and every time someone brought up Alice's big day, I felt the pressure behind it grow stronger, the water rising inch by inch, threatening to split me open. The hardest moments were the small ones, when my mother would casually drop a comment like, "Alice wants a lace hem just like the one your grandmother had," or "We're thinking about renting a carriage for her send-off." Little details tossed into conversation without a second thought, as if no one else in the room had ever worn a white dress or said vows or stood trembling at the edge of a new life. They talked about Alice's wedding as if it were the first one to ever happen in the family, the only one that mattered. And with every word, I sank further into the realization that my own marriage, my own joy, my own love, had been invisible to them. Sometimes I'd catch myself nodding along, murmuring things like, "That'll be beautiful," or "She'll love that," even while my stomach twisted into knots. It felt like I was disappearing, piece by piece, a ghost in the house I had once belonged to. I'd excuse myself to the kitchen under the pretense of checking the roast or needing more wine, just so I could stand in silence, gripping the counter until my fingers ached, swallowing the bitterness that kept rising in my throat. They never asked about my wedding anymore. Not one question. Not a single, simple "What was your favorite moment?" Or, "Did everything go the way you wanted?" There was no curiosity, no reflection, no acknowledgement that it had even happened. It was as if they had collectively decided to erase it, to leave it off the record, as though recognizing it would somehow take something away from Alice's day. I think the most unbearable part was realizing that it wasn't just the wedding they ignored. It was me. They didn't see me. Not really. I was there, I was present, I showed up, brought wine, cleaned dishes, laughed at their jokes, asked about their lives, but none of it ever came back. No one asked how my job was going, even though I had just landed a major client at Summit Cove. No one asked how married life was or how Alex and I were settling into our new apartment. Their eyes would light up for Alice, for her fiancé, for every little anecdote about bridal shows and seating charts. But when I spoke, it was like dropping a stone into a well and waiting for a splash that never came. I kept hoping that maybe at some point someone would pull me aside and say, "I'm sorry we weren't there. It was wrong. You deserved more." Just one sentence, one honest admission, and maybe I could have started to heal. But it never came. And as the weeks turned into months, I realized that I was the only one still carrying the weight of that day. To them there was nothing to forgive because in their eyes, nothing had been done wrong. The truth finally landed one afternoon when my mother called to ask if I could help with Alice's bridal shower. Her tone was light, cheerful, assuming. She was already listing decoration ideas before I could answer. I stood there holding the phone to my ear, staring out the window while her voice filled the room like static. And I knew in that moment with a clarity I hadn't felt before, that they didn't see me as someone who had been hurt. They didn't see me as someone who had been excluded or forgotten. They saw me as someone who was fine. Someone who could take it. Someone who didn't need the same care, the same celebration, the same love. They didn't think my wedding mattered. They didn't think I mattered. And nothing, no forced smile, no polite conversation, no fake laugh in a living room filled with people who never showed up for me, could make me unknow that truth. I said it clearly this time. I didn't dress it up or soften the edges or leave room for interpretation. I looked my parents in the eye, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest, and said, "I'm not going to Alice's wedding." For a few seconds neither of them reacted. My father blinked, his jaw tight as if my words hadn't landed yet. My mother, sitting beside him with a folded tea towel in her lap, tilted her head slightly like she hadn't heard me right. But then it came, that familiar shift in the air, the drop in temperature, the immediate recoil that always followed whenever I stepped even a little outside the script they had written for me. My father was the first to speak, his voice clipped and sharp, like a blade barely sheathed. "So that's it? You're just going to punish your sister because you can't stand not being the center of attention?" I didn't respond. I kept my eyes on him, trying not to flinch, trying not to let the heat crawling up my neck betray me. He leaned forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, his voice growing louder, angrier. "You're being selfish, Megan. You think this is about making some kind of statement? You think hurting Alice is going to make you feel better?" The word selfish echoed in my head, absurd in its irony. I had given everything to this family. My patience, my silence, my effort to belong in rooms where I was treated like a stranger. And when I finally said no, when I finally drew a line to protect what little peace I had left, I was the selfish one. My mother let out a breath through her nose, like she was trying to stay calm, as if I were the unreasonable child testing her limits. She reached across the small space between us, fingers outstretched, and placed her hand on my forearm in a gesture that was supposed to look comforting but felt hollow and rehearsed. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice dripping with a false tenderness I knew too well. "I know you're hurt, but this isn't the way to handle it. This is family. You show up no matter what." I pulled my arm away, gently but deliberately. Her fingers lingered for a second in the air, then dropped to her lap as her mouth flattened into a line. I could see the flicker of annoyance behind her eyes, the kind that came whenever I didn't fold easily into her expectations. I showed up for years, I said, my voice quieter now but firm. I showed up when no one showed up for me. I smiled when you ignored my wedding, when Alice acted like it never happened, when you sat in that same chair and told me work was more important than your daughter's marriage. I said nothing. I let it go. And now you want me to pretend none of that happened? To sit in a dress and clap while everyone celebrates a version of love you never even acknowledged in my life. That's enough, my father snapped. This isn't about your wedding. Don't twist things around. This is about you making everything harder than it has to be. Harder than it has to be, as if my pain was an inconvenience. As if my boundary was a disruption in the smooth, denial-soaked surface of this family's image. They didn't want honesty. They wanted quiet. They wanted compliance. And for most of my life I had given them that. But I wasn't a child anymore. I wasn't the girl who sat at the dinner table with perfect posture, waiting to be noticed. I wasn't the daughter who begged for approval with achievements and good behavior, thinking it would finally earn me a seat at the table of belonging. I had grown up. I had built a life. I had learned what love actually looked like, and I had learned what it didn't. So I stood up slow and calm and looked at them both. I'm not going, I said again. Not because I want to punish anyone, but because I'm done pretending. You've made it clear where I stand in this family. I'm just finally choosing to stop standing there. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. My father leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in disgust, like he didn't even recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Maybe they had spent so long loving a version of me that didn't exist. One who kept quiet, who played along, who didn't ask for too much. But that version of me was gone. She had packed her things the day no one showed up and she wasn't coming back. It happened late one night, sometime in early winter, when the ache of everything was still fresh, still bleeding just under the surface of my skin. I had been cleaning my desktop, sorting through files on my laptop, trying to bring some order to the mess of emails, wedding documents, receipts, and half-finished to-do lists I had been too numb to delete. At some point, without even thinking, I clicked into the folder labeled Home, Security Access, the one that housed the remote feed and archive from my parents' security system. A system I had helped set up for them 2 years earlier when they kept having issues with packages going missing and their front gate glitching open at night. I wasn't looking for anything in particular. It was one of those absent-minded, grief-driven reflexes, the kind you follow before you know what you're doing. A part of me just wanted to see the house, to see if the tree in the front yard had dropped its leaves, to look through a lens that wasn't mine but still felt familiar. I opened the footage from the week before my wedding and started skimming through the timestamps, watching frames jump by in a sterile, detached rhythm. And then I saw her. Alice. Standing in the front hallway holding a cream-colored envelope. My envelope. I recognized it immediately. The texture, the font I had spent an entire evening choosing, the wax seal I had melted and stamped myself with shaking fingers. She held it between 2 fingers like it was something sticky or absurd, then tore the flap open in one sharp motion. She didn't even read the entire card. She barely glanced at it before her mouth curled into a smirk. No way, she said loud and clear as if speaking to someone out of frame, though the feed showed she was alone. She's actually doing this. She laughed. Not a laugh of surprise or amusement, but the kind that was cruel in its ease, full of scorn. The kind of laugh someone gives when they want to make sure the world knows they're above you. She doesn't deserve a wedding, Alice muttered, shaking her head with a scoff. She can barely hold a conversation without sounding like a damn PowerPoint presentation. Then, without hesitation, she crumpled the invitation in one hand and walked into the kitchen, tossing the ball of paper directly into the trash bin near the fridge. She didn't look back. The camera caught everything, her face, her words, her carelessness. She didn't pause to consider, didn't hesitate or check if anyone was watching. Because she didn't care. She was that confident that no one would hold her accountable, that her contempt would stay hidden within the walls of a house where she was always safe. I watched the clip twice, sitting there in silence, my fingers frozen on the mouse, my mouth dry. The room around me seemed to stretch, to pull away like the very shape of my reality had shifted. I knew Alice didn't care for me, that much had been clear for years. But this, seeing it with my own eyes, hearing her voice, the venom in her tone, the casualness with which she discarded something I had poured love into, it was like swallowing glass. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't say a word. I just highlighted the section of the feed, downloaded it and saved it on my hard drive under a folder titled Keep. No one knew I had it. I didn't even know what I would do with it. But I couldn't let it disappear. I couldn't let it become just another thing I tried to explain to people who'd never believe me, just another wound disguised as a misunderstanding. There was something coldly validating about having proof, not to expose or destroy, but but simply to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things. That the rejection I felt wasn't some overreaction, that the pain had a source, a face, a timestamp. After saving the file, I sat still for a long time watching the empty hallway on the paused screen. The light from the foyer cast a shadow across the floor tiles, and for a moment, I remembered every time I had walked through that same hall with arms full of groceries, or holiday gifts, or work bags after long drives home. And I realized then with a quiet finality, that nothing about that place had ever really belonged to me. It had always belonged to her. It happened on a Thursday evening just after dinner when I answered the phone and heard my mother's voice laced with that familiar edge. The condescension wrapped in concern, the passive-aggressive sweetness she used when she thought she was being gentle, but the words were always needles. She said she wanted to talk, just for a minute, and I already knew where it was going before she even got there. "We're still holding out hope," she said, "that you'll come to the wedding. Alice is trying so hard to make it special, and your absence would only cast a shadow." I stayed silent, listening to the clink of her teaspoon in the background. She wasn't calling to talk, she was calling to instruct, to manage the optics, to tell me what role I was expected to play. "She's your sister," she added with a quiet sigh. "This resentment, it's not healthy, Megan. It looks like jealousy." There it was again. That word. Jealousy. As if that's all this ever was. Not pain. Not betrayal. Not grief from being erased again and again, made invisible in a family that only celebrated me when it served them. No, to them it was always jealousy, something small and petty and feminine, a flaw to be brushed off and corrected like smudged mascara or chipped nail polish. I hung up before I said anything I'd regret, but my hands were shaking. I stood in the middle of the kitchen staring at the sink, my phone still hot in my hand, and I knew something had shifted inside me. I had swallowed too much for too long. I had made myself small, careful, patient. I had chosen peace over truth again and again, but it had gotten me nowhere. They still saw me the same way, difficult, dramatic, bitter. So I opened my laptop, pulled up the file I had saved, the one of Alice in the hallway laughing at my wedding invitation saying I didn't deserve a wedding, crumpling my words and throwing them in the trash. I watched it once more in full, the sharp clarity of her voice echoing in that perfect, damning way. I didn't flinch this time. I didn't feel sick. I just felt cold. I opened my editing software, dragged the footage in, trimmed the silence at the start and end, and added a title screen, white text on a black background. Nothing fancy. Just a sentence that said, "For my family. With love." I didn't add music. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. The truth spoke clearly enough on its own. I watched the 2-minute clip again after exporting and I didn't feel proud, but I felt sure. And that was enough. I composed the email with hands that didn't tremble. I addressed it to both my parents, added the subject line, "Reception Video Suggestion," and attached the file. In the body I kept it simple. "I've put together a short video that I think captures the tone of the family dynamic perfectly. Please consider playing this during the reception. I think it says what needs to be said. With love, Megan." I reread the message once, twice, then hit send. There was no shaking afterward, no guilt, no surge of anxiety. Just stillness. Like the moment after a storm breaks, when the wind is gone and everything is soaked and quiet. I knew what I had done. And I knew why I had done it. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't spite. It was truth stripped of sugar and silence, and handed back to the people who had taught me again and again that love in our family only counted if it looked the way they wanted it to. And for the first time in my life I didn't care whether they forgave me for it. The call came 2 days later, just after noon, while I was sitting at my desk with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The screen of my laptop was open to a spreadsheet, but I hadn't been working. I'd been waiting. I knew it would come, the outrage, the damage control, the accusation disguised as wounded confusion. And I wasn't wrong. My phone lit up with her name, Mom, and I let it ring twice before answering. I said nothing, only brought the phone to my ear and waited. "What the hell is wrong with you?" she snapped, her voice shaking with fury. There was no preamble, no hello. "You thought this was funny? Thought you'd humiliate your sister in front of the whole family? This is disgusting, Megan. Just disgusting." I stayed quiet for a moment, letting her words hang there between us. She was breathing hard, probably pacing, one hand over her chest like she always did when she worked herself into a moral high. I imagined her in the kitchen, the blinds drawn halfway, the phone clutched between her shoulder and her cheek, rehearsing her role as the injured party. "We watched it," she continued, her voice tighter now, clipped and brittle. "Your father and I both. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. You want us to play that at the reception? Are you out of your mind? That's a direct attack on Alice. That's not love, that's humiliation." So I didn't speak. I didn't need to. I let her go on, let the sound of her voice rise and fall, sharp and rehearsed, like she was reading lines from a script she knew by heart. "She's getting married, Megan. It's her day. And you're trying to sabotage it because you still haven't let go of whatever bitterness you're carrying. You're trying to ruin this for her. For us." Then she paused, waiting, expecting perhaps an apology, a frantic backpedal, a moment of weakness where I would slip back into the daughter she could manage, the one who always smoothed things over and said, "I didn't mean it like that." But that daughter wasn't here anymore. So I spoke calm and clear, my voice low and steady. "No," I said. "I'm not trying to ruin anything. That video, it's not a lie. It's not edited or twisted or manipulated. It's the truth." She opened my invitation, mocked it, and threw it away. "And you knew she didn't come. You all did. And none of you said a word. You acted like my wedding didn't happen." She scoffed on the other end, a short, breathless sound full of contempt. "You're being dramatic again. That video wasn't meant to be shared." She didn't know she was being watched. But I did. I cut in sharper now. "And it doesn't matter whether she knew or not. She said what she meant. She meant it enough to throw away my invitation like garbage. And the worst part is, none of you cared enough to ask why I didn't send another. Why I never got a reply. You were all just fine with pretending it never happened." The silence that followed wasn't reflective. It was defensive. I could hear it, the way she pulled back slightly, trying to regroup, trying to find the next argument that would push me back into place. "We're not playing that video," she said finally, cold and final. "It's not appropriate. It's cruel." "No," I said again, this time with weight. "What's cruel is pretending someone doesn't exist because their life doesn't look the way you wanted it to. What's cruel is erasing a marriage, a day, a whole person just because it doesn't fit the story you prefer to tell at family dinners. I sent that video because it's the only way you people ever see anything. When it's undeniable, when it's right in front of you and recorded." Her breath caught slightly on the other end, a faint gasp that told me I had landed somewhere real. For the first time in the call, I heard a crack in the armor. Not guilt, not regret, but discomfort. And it was enough. "I don't care if you play it," I said, quiet again. "I didn't send it for shock value. I sent it because I'm done carrying the weight of your denial. I've lived with your silence, your favoritism, your selective memory for years. That video is 2 minutes of my reality. Just 2. Try living a lifetime of it." She didn't reply right away. There was a long pause, long enough for me to hear a faint clatter in the background. A dish set down too hard, or maybe the sound of her composure slipping. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, taut. "I don't know what you want from us anymore." I almost laughed. But I didn't. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and answered her honestly. "I wanted to be seen. Just once. But it's too late for that now." I sat across from Alex at our kitchen table, both of us quiet, the air between us thick with the weight of what had just happened. My mother's voice still echoed in my head. The sharpness, the fury, the way she had said cruel, like I was a stranger, like I had crossed some unforgivable line by simply showing the truth. I had already known they wouldn't play the video, but hearing them say it aloud with such disgust in their voices, still burned more than I expected. Alex reached for my hand across the table, his fingers steady, grounding. He didn't speak right away, just looked at me with that same kind of calm he always offered when my emotions threatened to spill over the edge. He had watched the video too. He had seen Alice's face, heard her voice, and he had said nothing at the time, not out of indifference, but because he understood that some wounds don't need commentary. They just need space to breathe. After a while I spoke. "They're going to pretend nothing happened," I said. "Again. Just like they did with everything else. And she's going to stand up there in her dress and smile like she's the kind one, the good one. Like the rest of us are just shadows orbiting around her light." Alex didn't say much. He didn't have to. He just nodded once, then said quietly, "So don't let them." I knew what he meant, and I knew he wasn't asking for revenge. He was reminding me that I didn't need permission to tell the truth. That I didn't need to keep asking for space in a family that never intended to make room for me. The next morning I took action. I searched for the event venue, the Glass Orchid, and found the name of the coordinator assigned to Alice's wedding. Her name was Jenny. I remembered hearing my mom mention her months ago with breathless praise. "Jenny is so professional. She's handling everything." I found the venue's contact form, filled it out, and within hours, Jenny emailed me back directly. Polite, efficient, just as described. I replied right away, introducing myself as the bride's sister, and said I was preparing a video as a surprise to be played during the reception toasts. A little family moment, I called it. Something to make the night special. She responded within the hour. "Hi Megan. That sounds lovely. We can absolutely include a short video during the toast segment. Please send me the file or link at least 24 hours before the event so we can queue it up in advance. Looking forward to helping you pull off the surprise. Best, Jenny." She had no idea what the video contained. No one outside of me and Alex did. I kept the file untouched. No titles this time, no lead-in, just the raw footage. It didn't need explanation. Her words, her expression, the sound of the envelope tearing, the laughter. It was all there, whole and brutal. I knew that once it played, no one in the room would be able to unhear it, unsee it, or pretend it didn't exist. I sat at my desk that evening, hands steady as I uploaded the video to a private folder and wrote Jenny back with a thank you and a download link. In the message I kept my tone light, professional. I said the video was only 2 minutes long and should be played after the maid of honor's speech. I said it would mean a lot to the family. I didn't lie, it would. Just not in the way they expected. After sending the email, I leaned back and stared out the window. The sky was low and gray, heavy with November clouds, and the street below was empty, quiet. I felt no guilt. No nerves. Just clarity. For once, I wasn't asking for inclusion. I wasn't asking to be understood. I wasn't begging to be heard. I was choosing to speak, not to argue, not to defend, but to state simply and unmistakably, this happened. And for the first time they were all going to see it. I was sitting on the balcony when it happened, wrapped in a thick gray sweater, watching the last light of the day slip beneath the rooftops across the street. The air smelled like rain and dry leaves, and the city below was quiet in that slow, stretched-out way November cities get before winter fully arrives. I didn't have music playing. I didn't want distraction. I wanted silence because silence was the only thing that didn't demand something from me. I had left my phone inside on the kitchen counter, face down, muted. I didn't plan to touch it for the rest of the evening. I had no desire to witness the fallout unfold in real time, no appetite for the anger, the accusations, the sudden performative apologies that would no doubt follow once the illusion cracked and everyone saw what had been hiding in plain sight for years. But then I heard the buzz, a sharp, urgent tremor against the marble counter, followed by another. Then another. I let it go for a few minutes, thinking maybe it was spam or some promotional notification. But it didn't stop. It kept buzzing with a desperate rhythm, so I got up and walked back inside, barefoot on the cold tile, and turned the phone over. 23 missed calls. 7 voicemails. Dozens of unread texts. At the top of them all, a message from Caitlin. You're not going to believe this. It's on. The video is actually on. Alice is crying. Your parents look like they've been hit by a truck. No one knows what to say. I stared at the screen. The room around me blurred for a second, like the air had shifted, dense and hot and vibrating with something I couldn't quite name. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't smile. I didn't even breathe for a few moments. I just stood there, frozen, watching the screen light up again. Another message from Caitlin. People are staring at your mom. Alice ran out. Someone tried to stop the video halfway, but Jenny said you gave permission. Megan. This is unreal. I didn't reply. I didn't type a single word. I put the phone back down, screen still pulsing with incoming calls. Some from my mother, some from my father, a few from unknown numbers I assumed were extended relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years but suddenly had something to say now that the family's polished mask had cracked on display in front of 200 wedding guests. I walked back outside, heart strangely calm, and sat down in the same spot. The wind had picked up slightly, brushing my cheek like breath. I pulled the sweater tighter around myself and exhaled. Not relief. Not vengeance. Something quieter. Something heavier. There was no joy in knowing Alice had cried. There was no thrill in imagining my parents wide-eyed and panicked as guests looked around, uncertain how to respond to what they'd just seen. The clip didn't contain a scandal or a secret. It wasn't some twisted revenge fantasy. It was simply the truth, stripped bare, broadcast without warning. It was the moment they could no longer hide behind silence, no longer pretend they hadn't known. I had given them every opportunity. I had called. I had asked. I had explained, begged, waited, forgiven. I had played the dutiful daughter, the kind older sister, the adult in the room who swallowed her hurt with a polite smile. And none of it had mattered. Not until they were made to see what they had ignored. Not until their friends and neighbors and in-laws watched their golden child toss my wedding invitation into a trash can and laugh. The phone continued buzzing long after the sky turned dark. I could see it lighting up faintly through the glass door, each vibration a ripple in the silence. But I didn't answer. I wouldn't answer. Not now. Maybe not ever. They could sit in their discomfort. They could explain it to the guest. They could look at each other and wonder how it got to this point, how I had changed, how I had done something so cruel. But I wasn't the one who changed. I was just the one who stopped pretending. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care what they said about me. I didn't care how I looked in their story. I had told my own. And I let it speak for itself. It was close to midnight when I heard the knock. Not gentle, not hesitant, but hard and insistent, like a fist being driven into the wood over and over. I had been sitting in the dark, the only light coming from a candle burning low on the windowsill. I didn't move at first. I knew who it was. I felt it in my chest before I even stood. When I opened the door, my father was already stepping forward, his jaw clenched, eyes wild, body stiff with fury that seemed barely contained. He didn't wait to be invited in. He crossed the threshold like it still belonged to him, like he had the right to be there, like I was the one who had something to answer for. "You destroyed it," he said, standing in the center of my living room as if he owned the air in it. "You destroyed your sister's wedding." His voice was low but thick with rage, the kind of anger that simmers beneath the surface until it boils over and scorches everything around it. I closed the door behind him slowly and stayed by it, my back to the cool wood, my hands steady. "She cried in front of everyone," he said, turning to face me fully. "She had to leave her own reception. Your mother hasn't stopped shaking. Do you even understand what you've done?" I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, at the man who had once held my hand crossing parking lots, who had taken me to softball games, who had sat through every parent-teacher meeting with a clipboard in his lap and a pen ready, always trying to appear composed, competent, involved. And yet here he was now, standing in my home like a stranger, seeing me not as a daughter, but as a threat to the illusion he had spent a lifetime curating. "I showed the truth," I said quietly. "That's all I did." He stared at me like I'd spoken another language. He didn't want truth. He wanted obedience. He wanted silence. He wanted things tucked back under the rug where they belonged, where he wouldn't have to confront them. "You humiliated your sister," he said, stepping closer. "In front of 200 people. That wasn't the truth, that was cruelty." I didn't move. I didn't back away. I had nothing left in me to flinch with. "No," I said. "What she did to me was cruel. What you all did was cruel. You erased my wedding. You erased me." She opened my invitation, laughed at it, said I didn't deserve a wedding, and threw it away. "That's what's on the video. That's not sabotage. That's just what happened." His face contorted, some mix of disbelief and anger and desperation. "You think this fixes something? You think this makes anything better?" "No," I said, my voice low but firm. "It doesn't fix anything. But at least now I'm not the only one who has to live with it." He looked at me then and I saw something shift, not softening but something more dangerous. That edge people find when they realize they can't control you anymore, when all the old tools, guilt, shame, dismissal, no longer work. "You're going to lose your family over this," he said, the words like stone. "You keep going like this and you'll end up alone." I looked him in the eyes, steady and clear, and answered without hesitation. "Maybe," I said. "But I'll still have myself." That landed harder than anything else I could have said. For a moment he said nothing. His mouth opened like he wanted to throw something else at me. Another threat, another warning, but the silence between us swelled until even he knew it was useless. He turned then without another word and walked back toward the door. I didn't follow. I didn't ask him to stay or explain or rethink. I just stood there watching his figure retreat down the hallway, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that didn't hurt the way I thought it might. I was alone in the quiet again. But this time it didn't feel like loss. It felt like freedom. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not silent but strangely still, like the aftermath of a heavy storm. At first it felt like everything in my life might begin to collapse under the weight of what I'd done. I braced myself for consequences, professional, personal, emotional. I imagined the worst. A damaged reputation, whispered gossip at work, sideways glances at the grocery store from people who knew my last name. I thought maybe I'd walk into meetings and feel the air shift, colleagues avoiding eye contact. But none of that happened. Instead, the first emails I received weren't from clients or supervisors, but from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. Some were cautious, carefully worded, like they weren't sure if they were allowed to say what they felt. One message from my cousin Lauren simply read, "I saw the video. I had no idea. I'm sorry. I should have been there." Another arrived late one night from my Aunt Margaret, who had always been reserved and loyal to my mother's side. I watched it 3 times. "I'm ashamed I believed the version of you they told us. If you ever want to talk, I'm here." Of course, not everyone reacted that way. Some relatives unfollowed me on social media within hours. Others sent scathing, self-righteous paragraphs about airing private family matters in public and bringing shame to the family name. My Uncle Patrick called my actions disgusting in a group chat I wasn't even a part of. Caitlin forwarded me the screenshot. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Their loyalty had always been to appearances, not people. I had never been one of them in any meaningful way. But amidst all the noise, what surprised me most was how quickly the rest of my life moved forward. My work at Summit Cove didn't suffer. In fact, the opposite happened. The week after the video circulated privately through the family, I received a calendar invite from my department head. I walked into the conference room expecting a reprimand or at least some awkward curiosity, but instead I was offered a promotion. They made me senior event coordinator. The title wasn't just a raise or a line from my resume. It was recognition long overdue but deeply validating. It meant someone was paying attention to the work I had done. The hours, the precision, the way I handled impossible clients and near disasters with quiet competence. No one in the room mentioned my family, and I was grateful for that. I walked out of that meeting with my shoulders back, my breath steady, feeling something I hadn't felt in months, intact. And yet, in the midst of all the outer calm, there was still the strange ache of knowing I had torn something open that couldn't be stitched shut again. I didn't regret it, but I knew what it cost. My mother hadn't called again. My father had returned to silence. Alice was a ghost, her social media scrubbed, the wedding photos carefully curated to exclude any trace of the video. They were already reworking the story, I was sure. Reframing themselves as the victims. Positioning me as unwell, unstable, dramatic. It didn't matter. The people who were always going to believe that version never wanted to see me clearly in the first place. But the ones who did, the ones who reached out quietly, hesitantly, with apologies and softness I hadn't expected, they reminded me that the truth, however uncomfortable, had power. Not just to destroy, but to shift something. To clear space. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been. The fury had burned through and left something cleaner behind. Not peace exactly, but a sense of alignment, like I had finally stepped back into myself after years of contorting into a shape that pleased everyone but me. I still kept the video saved in a folder on my hard drive, though I hadn't opened it again. I didn't need to. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. Not to them. Not to anyone. I had my name on the office door now. I had coworkers who respected me. I had Alex steady and true beside me. And slowly I was beginning to understand that being part of a family shouldn't cost you your sense of self. If it did, it was never love to begin with. The message came on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of gray, windless day that makes everything feel suspended in stillness. I was sitting at the kitchen table, slowly stirring a spoon through my coffee, when my phone buzzed and her name appeared on the screen, not buried in a storm of missed calls or chaos, but alone, centered, like it had waited for its own space to arrive. Alice, can we talk? I stared at the words for a long time, unsure what I felt. Not anger. Not fear. Something more hollow. A cautious stillness, like walking barefoot across ground you're not sure will hold your weight. I typed out a short reply, choosing every word as carefully as if they were stones I was placing between us. Me, okay. Café Brixley. Tomorrow at 5. I arrived early not because I was eager but because I wanted to see the room first, to choose the table near the window, the one with enough light and space between us and the world. The place smelled like cinnamon and espresso, familiar and safe, and I wrapped my hands around the cup even before I drank, grounding myself in the heat. When she walked in, I knew immediately that she'd rehearsed this. Her steps were slower, her clothes slightly too neat, her expression drawn in cautious lines. She sat down without speaking right away, tucking her coat beneath her like she didn't want to disturb the air between us more than necessary. When she finally looked up, her eyes were rimmed with something I couldn't quite name. Not quite regret, not quite shame, but something hovering between. I don't know where to start, she said. I nodded once, waiting. She exhaled sharply, then looked down at her folded hands on the table. I was jealous, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know that probably sounds ridiculous. But when you got married first, when you didn't wait, when you didn't make a big deal out of it, I don't know, it made me feel small. Like you had done something without needing anyone's permission, and it made me look like I was behind. I didn't respond. I let her keep going. I saw the envelope and I knew what it was, she continued. And I laughed not because it was funny but because I didn't know how else to respond to feeling left out of something I never thought you'd do before me. I was petty. And I was cruel. And I know it doesn't excuse anything, but I wanted you to hear it from me, not filtered through Mom or anyone else. She paused, then looking up for the first time, her eyes meeting mine, tentative, raw. I regret it, she said simply. All of it. There was a long silence between us. I took a sip of my coffee not because I needed it but because it gave my hands something to do while my thoughts settled. That's not an apology, I said finally, and my voice was calm. That's an explanation. A glimpse of the why. And maybe I needed that more than I realized. Her face didn't crumble the way I expected. She nodded slowly, accepting the truth of it. But, I added, it's a beginning. And that's more than anyone else has offered me. She looked down again, pressing her thumb into her palm like she needed to hold herself together. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no sudden warmth. Just a quiet pause, a breath of mutual recognition. When we stood to leave, she hesitated at the table's edge. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, she said. I looked at her, my voice steady, gentle but firm. They won't, I said. But maybe we can start from here. She gave the faintest nod. Not quite a smile but not a dismissal either. We stepped out into the street, each going in a different direction. The air was colder now and I pulled my coat tighter as I walked away. We weren't healed. We weren't close. But we had stopped pretending to be enemies. And for now that was enough. Years passed, slowly at first and then all at once, like time had decided to loosen its grip and let life breathe again. Alex and I built something solid, something that wasn't perfect but was deeply ours. We bought a house just outside the city, a quiet place with tall trees and creaking floors, the kind of home where mornings smelled like coffee and wood and the soft warmth of being understood. We adopted a dog, a gangly golden mutt who answered only when she felt like it and who curled up at our feet every night as though she had chosen us from the start. We started talking about children not as a distant possibility, but as a real shape on the horizon. Something we wanted not to complete us, but to expand the peace we had fought so hard to build. There were days when I didn't think about my parents at all. And there were days when they drifted into my mind like ghosts. Quieter now, less angry, more like unfinished chapters that no longer define the ending. I stopped needing answers. I stopped needing the apology I had once begged for in silence. Life became quieter, warmer, less reactive. I woke up each morning without the weight of being someone else's disappointment. Then one autumn afternoon a letter arrived. It was handwritten. No return address, just my name and house number in my mother's unmistakable cursive, slightly shakier than I remembered. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, not from weight but from meaning. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter for 3 days, untouched, while I went about my life, walking the dog, working late, cooking dinner with Alex. I didn't feel resentment anymore. I just didn't feel urgency. When I finally opened it, the paper smelled faintly like her perfume, something floral and thin, and the ink had bled slightly on one of the pages, as though a hand had trembled too long in one spot. It wasn't a long letter, but it was careful. She said they had been wrong. That they had failed to see me. That time had shown them things they hadn't wanted to admit before. About themselves, about Alice, about how love sometimes turns into favoritism without anyone meaning it to. She didn't excuse it. She didn't ask for forgiveness outright. She just said they were sorry and that if I ever wanted to speak they would be waiting. I didn't respond. Not out of punishment but because I had learned that silence too can be a boundary. I needed to feel what I felt first. Not rush to mend something just because someone finally noticed the crack. But I did acknowledge something quietly inside myself. They had started. And sometimes the start is all that can be asked of someone who's lived too long in denial. Alice and I spoke occasionally, mostly surface-level exchanges. Polite, brief, without the urgency of closeness but not strained. She divorced 2 years after her wedding. It wasn't messy, just inevitable. Her life changed direction sharply and without warning. She moved cities, changed jobs, started over in a way I recognized intimately. The family scattered not with drama but with time. Priorities shifted, bonds frayed where they had once been tight, and I watched from a distance as the center slowly dissolved. But I didn't grieve it. Because by then I no longer needed their approval. I no longer measured my worth against the volume of their applause or the softness of their voices when they spoke my name. I had stopped trying to be the daughter who fit into a version of family that never made room for who I truly was. I had stopped bending. I had myself. I had mornings wrapped in blankets, Alex's hand on my back, the hum of a dog breathing against the floorboards. I had laughter that echoed in rooms we had painted together, quiet dinners with music playing low, memories built without performance. I had my truth. Sharp, unpolished, unfiltered, and I carried it not as a burden but as a spine. And with every year that passed the peace grew louder, stronger, deeper. That was the real revenge if it could even be called that. Not bitterness. Not retaliation. But healing. Choosing to live fully in a life they once tried to pretend didn't exist. Finding joy in the absence of approval. Breathing without apology. In the end I didn't need them to say I mattered. I already knew.